Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today on new features in Design Master Electrical 8.7. I'm excited to be showing you all the new stuff we've been working on for the last little while. So a lot of the features we added in this release are related to the photometrics. So we'll walk through those changes first, just to see the new features we put into there for you. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at this photometric boundary. I've got a photometric plan set up here with some light fixtures and whatnot already put together. First thing is when we query the boundary, we have this new checkbox here, recalculate illuminance levels. What this means is that when we make a change to the calculation boundary, it's going to run the photometric calculation automatically. So that's just a convenience as you're making your changes. You don't have to then go through the second step of running the calculation. You can still do that. If you need to change the calculation settings, you can run our standard calculate command, but that'll just save you a step. We're going to leave that toggled on. And I'm also going to toggle on a new setting, which is our vertical calculations. What this will do is this will calculate the foot candle level vertically at the edges of the boundary. So if you need that for calculation purposes to make sure you're not having too much light spilling out into adjacent properties, that's what this calculation is for. We'll turn that on. There's two settings, one for the spacing for the calculation. So we're going to do a calculation every 2 feet. And then a second spacing that's the actual distance on the drawing, how far apart the calculation levels are displayed. Because if you do them as tight, if you do them every 2 feet, the numbers start to run into each other. So we have a little extra spacing in there to get the display right. And then the ending elevation, so we're going to go from the ground up to this elevation, so up to 8 feet. Click OK, and it'll run that calculation. And you'll see that it puts the calculated values here on the boundary, and that's got nothing because there's no light pointing over there. If we come take a look at here, behind this light, there's a little bit of behind this fixture, there's a little bit of light spilling out. So we have these foot candle levels being calculated. So those are just displayed here. And then we also display the elevation where each of those calculations are being taken. So that's the new vertical calculation we have. We have those on the edges of boundaries. If you insert a calculation line, we can also do the vertical calculation there. So if you're using any of our lines, we have the same option there to calculate the vertical foot candles at that along that line. We have a new feature for creating these boundaries. A lot of people want to be able to select a polyline and have them created. So if I create a new polyline, and so if you've got a line that represents your boundary, it's not actually in Design Master registered as a boundary at this point, but it's just a polyline in there. We now have the ability to take that polyline and convert it into a calculation area. So if we need to do a new calculation area, you do all your settings. I'll leave our vertical calculations on, and it'll prompt for the points, or you can press enter and select this polyline and convert it to a calculation area in Design Master. It also gives you the option to erase it or not. If you erase it, it goes away. If you leave it, then you'll have your polyline and our polyline on top of it. So depending on what you want to do. So I'll erase it, put it in our calculation schedule. So now we've created a new boundary. It's the same as what it was before, but it was based upon that polyline that I drew. The other option that we have when we're querying, we have a new two new buttons here. One to set our grid origin and one to set the grid angle. And what this does is it lets you have some control over where those foot candles are exactly being displayed in your area. Previously, we just kind of threw it in there and we hoped that you liked our default. If there's ever a case where you do need to shift these a little bit, you can. So we can run set grid origin. And essentially, you select a point and there will be a foot candle value calculated there. And then we'll create the grid from that point. So I'll just select a point here in between where we've already got values. If we click OK, it'll run the calculation again. So we should get a value here. And then everything's shifted based upon that new location. We can also specify an angle. So right now everything is kind of the XY angle there. But if we wanted to have it match this boundary edge, we could just draw a line here, and it's going to use this line for our angle. And when we click OK, the foot candle levels, the grid is now going to be tilted so that it's parallel with that. And then obviously here on the edges, it's kind of not parallel anymore. So that gives you just a little bit more control of how the points are chosen for where we do the calculations. The calculations aren't really going to change, but that gives you better control over how that's going to be displayed if you need that for any purpose. When you are doing the calculation, we now have metric units available. So for the distance unit, we have inch or foot. That is previously what the software had. We now can do millimeter, centimeter, or meter. So this is for the scale of your drawing. For interior floor plans, for most of our stuff, everything assumes that you're using a distance unit of an inch. For outdoor photometrics, we do have the option to change that and say this is actually based upon a foot. Or in this case, you can actually do it in metric, centimeters, millimeters, whatever you need, meters. Now, so you can change that. And if you do that, you are going to get a different calculation. Let's do a meter here. And we do prompt to make sure that, because there are some cases where it'll take a long time. I think the meter is going to end up taking a really long time. I'm going to change that. Because if you use the wrong unit, the calculation takes forever. So we prompt you, say, hey, this is going to take a really long time. Did you actually mean that? So here, if I set it to centimeters, this is so that everything is totally off and wrong at this point because the scale is wrong. So you do need to make sure your scale matches your drawing. We'll set that back to inch and run the calculation again. We also can now, we now have a new option for the light fixtures to do multi-head light fixtures. Previously, if you wanted two heads, you kind of had to put two light fixtures on top of each other, and it was a little bit, not ideal. Now we can actually create a light fixture that has multiple heads. So I'm going to go to my light fixture schedule here. I'm going to make a Z4. I'm going to assign this dual mounted, pole mounted light fixture. So we'll have two heads. We automatically add a couple new blocks for you to your light fixture list. So these 3 blocks will be added automatically. You can get rid of them or modify them as necessary, but now you've got a 90-degree offset, 3-head, and a 4-head light fixture available. We'll use this one. Then in the IES file section, we have the number of heads. And this is actually what affects the calculation and how you're going to get those multiple heads being included. So we'll do 2 at 180-degree offset. So there's, for 2, we have the 180 or the 90. They pretty much match what those 2 graphics look like. So the 180 will do this. We'll do a 90 next. We'll leave it like that. And I will change this light fixture to use this new Z4. So now we have the new fixture in there. And if we run the calculations again, we should get significantly more light over here. And we do, like we would expect. Just to show you that 90-degree offset, I will choose my 90-degree offset. And then we have the 2 heads, 90-degree offset. You do need to make sure that the graphic matches how our offset works. And if it doesn't match, that's where the IES rotation comes into play. Rotate it 90 or 180 degrees, whatever you need to do to get it to match. So create one, insert it, run the calculation, make sure it looks right. And then if it doesn't, you can rotate your IES file. And then running the calculation again, we should get significantly more light over here. And we do, and you can also see in a vertical calculation, we're now spilling a lot of light into the adjacent property. So we can have that calculation being displayed as well. Those are the changes to the photometrics. So those are the adjustments we made. Probably the multiple light fixture heads is like the biggest one, but the rest of them are just a bunch of improvements to make it a little bit easier for you to use. Hopefully make it a little more effective when you're doing your calculations and that new vertical calculation. If you have jurisdictions asking for it, you now have that available as a calculation that we can perform. We made a couple changes to the one-line diagram. These, again, are not huge, but the focus here is to make it just a little bit easier to use. The first change is that if you make any changes while looking at your one-line diagram, if you make any changes to your panels, we'll actually update that automatically for you without having to update the entire one line. So if I query this panel and say we want to change this to DP-1, so that's just a simple change. I have the breaker size being listed here. So say we change this to a 400 amp panel, and I'll set it to be a 400 amp breaker as well. Save those changes, and we're going to get our new name. Our new breaker size is going to be displayed there. So those changes are going to be pushed into the drawing to just save you running that update. This fault is probably not correct because that requires a whole recalculation. So not everything updates immediately because that would be too much. It would take too long, but just minor changes like that are going to be reflected in the one-line diagram immediately. When you are creating devices, we now have the option to insert them in the one line a little more easily. So I will take this A panel here. I'm going to make a copy of it. And so now we have this C panel. What I really wanted to show you is that we have these new insert on one line and insert on plan view buttons. So rather than, it's just a shorter way to get to these insert commands so that when you create it, you can now immediately insert it on the one line diagram. So it basically runs the insert command with it selected. So you could choose something else, but you wouldn't need to. You choose your block, you click OK, you put it on the one line diagram. Okay, so now it's immediately inserted for you. And it also gives you an option, if it's not connected to anything, to choose what to connect it to. I can choose this DP panel, and it'll run the connection command, so we can actually make this connection. I can choose the breaker to connect it to, click connect, and it'll actually do the connection. So this panel C is now connected. It drew the feeder in for us. So all of those are features that previously existed. They were just in multiple different spots. The workflow wasn't quite as optimized as it is now. So it's a little easier to get that panel on the one line to connect it to a panel, to another panel. So that's the intention behind those features. With that connect command, we also can run that separately. So we have a new connect distribution equipment on one line. So if we create it and insert it, but don't connect it immediately, we can come back and connect it later. So say I make a copy of this, we'll call it panel D, do the same thing, insert on the one line diagram, and I'm not going to connect it. So now we have this panel, it's not connected to anything. We can run this command to connect it. I can select panel D, connect it to DP1, and it'll make the connection. If you then need to change it, you can do the same thing. I can take panel D and say I want to feed it from panel C instead. You can do the same thing. And you'll notice that when I run the connect, you don't actually need to change the number of poles anymore. Previously, you had to say this is a 3-pole breaker. Now we actually do that for you. We just say, okay, this is a 3-pole panel. Clearly, you want a 3-pole breaker. We'll just make that change. So it's still there. You can change your number of poles, but it's no longer required. Press connect. It'll make the 3-pole circuit for us. And it'll do the connection. And it's struggling a little bit with the drafting. So you would come back and you could use our standard features to redraw that feeder and make it look better. But this way you can, on your one line, do your connection by selecting things. And just as a reminder, this is what previously you had to do. You had to select the downstream panel, select the upstream panel. It was not the most intuitive or easiest workflow. It still exists. So if you're not putting things on the one line, you can still do that. But if they're on the one line, you can connect them directly without having to go through that other workflow. And then finally, in the edit multiple command, when you run the edit multiple, if you select from the drawing, you can now select from the single line. So if we select these two panels, we can do an edit multiple on those two panels. And again, those will update automatically when you change them now without having to run the update one line command. For voltage drop, we have a couple changes, and for circuiting, so I'll come over here to my schedules. Previously, if you didn't have devices on the drawing, we wouldn't display the voltage drop to that branch circuit. Now we actually will calculate the voltage drop to that branch circuit for you. So I'm going to go ahead and create two circuits. This one will have a length. So we've got 5 kVA of heating, and we'll set a custom length. So now we actually, for voltage drop, you need a length and you need a load. So now we can actually do a calculation. We're going to put the whole load at that distance and calculate the voltage drop. If we don't do that, you'll see that we don't get a voltage drop at all. So if I have another load here, but don't set the circuit length, since there's no devices, we can't calculate the voltage drop. So if I run the voltage drop, update the voltage drop schedule here, we're going to show all of our circuits with load. It's going to take a moment. The voltage drop calculation does take a little while because we do have to look at all those branch circuits and calculate the voltage drop on them. But once it's done, we can see that we'll have a voltage drop on one of those circuits, the one that had the length added, but not on the other circuit. That was on panel A. So here's that 24. That one has the length, has a voltage drop. 26 does not have a voltage drop. We also have a new button, actually no, an expanded button. So this previously was clear loads. Now it's clear circuit descriptions and loads. So previously it just got rid of what was down here, but left all the settings up here. Now it essentially clears everything on the circuit. So that button will clear a circuit of all the values that you've changed on it. So it gets rid of that description, sets this whole thing back to a space for us. For transformers, we now have a custom KVA. So previously when you had a transformer with a KVA that wasn't listed, you had to contact us and we had to like embed it in the software, which wasn't ideal. So now we have the list of common transformer sizes. And if you have something that's not common, you just select custom and you can type in any value that you want. So if you got a really small transformer, you can do it that way, or just something that's not listed. So we have that custom as an option for transformers. We have a new feature to insert elevation labels on devices. So if you just want to tag the elevation of the device, we can run insert elevation label, select the device, and that is at 0 feet. So that's not as interesting, but these light fixtures, apparently we're not given an elevation. Let's go over here to our outdoor photometrics. These will have elevations. So if I run my elevation here, select the device, there, that's at 25 feet. And so we've got the label there. So if you want to label your, for your outdoor lights or whatever you have, you can change the elevation or insert the elevation label and have that labeled. And that way, then when you go back and change it, that value will update. So if we put this at 20 feet, the label is going to update as well. For recurring panel instances, we do have we have recurring panels. This is for doing essentially multifamily dwellings. We have the delete command. So if you don't have to put them all on the drawing, so you can just have them living in the database. We have this command to delete them. Previously, you had to delete them one at a time. It was a little awkward. If you need to delete multiple, you can use Shift and Control to select multiple of them. And then when you run delete, it'll get rid of all of them. So the delete recurring panel instances allows you to delete more than one. And the final feature is for your standards databases. If you have more than one, you can now set which one's your default. So currently I only have one. I'm going to create another. So now we have two, and we can click this set as default. And that just means that when you start a project, that's the one that's going to be selected automatically. You can still change it. So that's really just choosing which one's going to be selected. So if we run the start new project, you'll see that that one is selected. That's the default, but you can always change it. That is it for the new features in this release. Are there any other questions or comments on those? You can go ahead and put them in the chat. You do have audio, so you can ask them as well if you'd prefer. All right, doesn't look like there's any other questions. So thanks for attending the webinar. I hope you found this explanation useful. And yeah, if you have questions or comments, you can always contact us. You can send us an email at support@designmaster.biz or send us or call us at 866-516-9497. Thanks and have a good day.